Help me teach them a lesson. Those were the last words I ever expected to hear from my grandmother. Not because she was fragile. Not because she couldn't defend herself. But because Margaret Mitchell was, without question, the toughest person I'd ever known. At 78 years old, she was the kind of woman who commanded respect without asking for it. Veterans stood a little straighter when they saw her. Neighbors showed up every Christmas with homemade pies. City officials invited her to speak at Memorial Day events. She had spent 23 years serving as a Navy nurse and another 3 decades dedicating herself to everyone around her. And yet there she sat in her own kitchen, tears in her eyes, while my parents discussed dividing up her life in the next room. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy. 3 days before all this happened, I'd completed a training assignment in Virginia ahead of schedule. Instead of staying on base waiting for paperwork, I decided to drive back to Ohio and surprise Grandma. It had been nearly 4 months since I'd seen her in person. We talked every Sunday without fail, but phone calls aren't the same as sitting across the table from someone you love. The truth is, Grandma helped raise me. After my grandfather passed away, my parents were constantly occupied, working longer hours, chasing promotions, worrying about finances. Grandma filled in the gaps. She sat in the audience at every school play. She ran beside me while I learned to ride a bicycle. When I broke my arm at 12, she spent nights in the hospital room beside me. And she was the reason I joined the Navy. I expected her to be thrilled when I showed up unexpectedly. I had no idea what I was about to find. The first thing I noticed was the driveway. My father's pickup was parked beside my mother's SUV. My Uncle Ray's old Ford was there too. That immediately felt strange. No one had mentioned a family gathering. As I walked toward the front porch, voices drifted through an open window. Not conversation. Arguments. I recognized Uncle Ray first. We should put the property on the market before winter. My father's voice followed. That's exactly what I'd been saying. I stopped mid-step. Something wasn't right. Then Ray laughed. We could probably get $400,000 for the house alone. A knot formed in my stomach. The house? Grandma's house? I moved closer. Then I heard my mother's voice. And her savings account isn't exactly small either. I froze. For a moment, I convinced myself I'd misunderstood. Then my father spoke again. Once she's moved into assisted living, she won't need most of that money anyway. A wave of anger hit me so hard I almost felt dizzy. Assisted living? What were they talking about? Grandma wasn't helpless. She was 78, not 98. She still drove herself everywhere. She volunteered at the Veterans Center. She shoveled her own driveway after snowstorms. No one had ever mentioned assisted living. Not once. I pushed open the front door. The conversation died instantly. 3 faces turned toward me. Surprised. Uneasy. Caught. Sarah, my mother said. What are you doing here? I looked from one face to the next. Nobody smiled. Nobody seemed happy to see me. If anything, they looked nervous. My training ended early, I said. Dad forced a laugh. Well, that's unexpected. My eyes dropped to the paper scattered across the coffee table. Property valuations. Bank documents. Real estate brochures. Things that absolutely didn't belong there. Where's Grandma? I asked. Nobody answered immediately. That silence told me more than words ever could. Finally, my mother gestured toward the kitchen. She's back there. I found Grandma sitting alone at the table. A cup of coffee sat untouched in front of her. The second I saw her face, my chest tightened. Her eyes were swollen. Her shoulders sagged. She seemed diminished somehow. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone had taken a piece of her spirit. Grandma? She looked up. For a second, she seemed confused. Then recognition flickered across her face. A small smile appeared. The kind people wear when they're trying desperately not to cry. Sarah. I crossed the room and wrapped my arms around her. The moment I did, she broke. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just quiet tears. The kind that come from deep hurt. The kind that say more than words ever could. I held her while anger burned inside me. Nobody deserved this. Least of all her. After a few minutes, she pulled back and wiped her eyes. I'm sorry. You have absolutely nothing to apologize for. She nodded toward the living room. They've been here since this morning. I knew exactly who she meant. What happened? She stared into her coffee. For several moments, she said nothing. Then, quietly, she answered. They think I've become a burden. I could barely believe what I was hearing. A burden. This woman had spent her entire life helping everyone around her. A sad smile crossed her face. They say they're worried about me. There wasn't anger in her voice. Only disappointment. And somehow, that hurt even more. I stood up and headed toward the living room. I was ready to throw every one of them out of the house. Maybe call an attorney. Maybe call the police. Maybe both. But before I reached the doorway, a hand caught my wrist. I looked down. Grandma. For such a small woman, her grip was surprisingly strong. Don't. I stared at her. Grandma, please. Then I saw it. Not fear. Not helplessness. Something else. Something sharp. Calculated. The same expression she'd worn when telling stories about difficult days in the Navy. The look of someone already planning 3 moves ahead. Slowly, I sat back down. What is it? She glanced toward the living room to make sure nobody was listening. Then she leaned closer. So close I could barely hear her. They don't know. I frowned. Don't know what? A faint smile appeared. The first genuine smile I'd seen from her all day. Then she whispered the words that changed everything. Help me teach them a lesson. I stared at her. Completely stunned. Grandma, a lesson? This was the woman who spent her life preaching forgiveness. The woman who volunteered every Christmas morning. The woman who refused to speak badly about anyone. She squeezed my hand. A spark of determination lit her eyes. I don't mean what you think. What do you mean? Grandma glanced upward, toward the ceiling, toward the attic above us, a place I hadn't thought about in years. There's something up there. What kind of something? Her eyes locked onto mine. The old Navy footlocker. I knew exactly what she meant. My grandfather's military trunk. An old Navy storage chest that had been sitting in the attic for decades. As far as I knew, nobody ever touched it. Nobody even talked about it. Grandma lowered her voice. They think they've figured everything out. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. But they forgot who they're dealing with. Then she pointed toward the attic stairs. Help me bring it down. And in that moment, I realized something important. My grandmother wasn't defeated. Not even remotely. She was preparing for a counterattack. And whatever was hidden inside that footlocker, my parents and Uncle Ray had no idea it existed. For the next 20 minutes, I felt less like a Navy officer visiting family and more like I was carrying out a classified mission. Not because anyone was dangerous. Because Grandma insisted on secrecy. Wait until they're distracted, she whispered. I couldn't help smiling. This version of her felt familiar. The woman sitting at the kitchen table wasn't the frail elderly widow my parents seemed to see. This was Lieutenant Margaret Mitchell. Retired, yes. Broken, absolutely not. The opportunity came when my mother announced she was making another pot of coffee. A few minutes later, my father and Uncle Ray stepped outside to discuss property values and real estate listings. Grandma nodded toward the hallway. Now. I climbed the attic stairs while she waited below. The house groaned softly beneath my feet. I hadn't been up there since I was a teenager. Dust coated nearly everything. Cardboard boxes filled with decades of family history lined the walls. Holiday decorations. Old furniture. Photo albums. Forgotten memories. And there, tucked against the far wall exactly where I remembered it, sat the footlocker. Navy blue. Heavy steel corners. Scuffed from age and use. The paint was faded, but the trunk still looked sturdy enough to survive another 100 years. I carried it downstairs carefully. When I set it on the kitchen floor, Grandma rested her hand on the lid. For a brief moment, her expression softened. Almost as though she were greeting an old friend. "I haven't opened this in a very long time," she said quietly. Then she reached into her pocket. A small brass key appeared in her hand. The lock clicked. I expected to find cash. Legal paperwork. Evidence against my parents. Something dramatic. Instead, I found an entire life. Letters. Photographs. Military records. Awards. Certificates. Newspaper clippings. Memories carefully preserved inside a steel box. Grandma picked up the first photograph. A young woman stared back at us. She wore a Navy uniform. Dark hair. Straight posture. Confident eyes. For a moment, I barely recognized her. "You were beautiful." Grandma laughed. "Were?" I laughed too. The first genuine laugh I'd had all day. "Still are." Smart answer. We spent the next hour exploring the contents. Each item revealed another chapter of her life. A Navy Commendation Medal. A Meritorious Service Medal. Letters from sailors she'd treated. Photographs from military hospitals. Handwritten thank you notes from grateful families. I picked up an old envelope that had yellowed with age. The paper felt delicate in my hands. The sender's name was James Carter. Inside was a letter dated more than 40 years earlier. I began reading aloud. "Dear Lieutenant Mitchell." The letter told the story of a young sailor who had suffered severe injuries overseas. During recovery, he had fallen into despair. According to the letter, Grandma visited him every day. She encouraged him. Listened to him. Refused to let him give up. Years later, he became a teacher. Then a school principal. Eventually, a grandfather. The final sentence stopped me cold. "If you hadn't believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, I never would have lived long enough to meet my grandchildren." I looked up. Grandma simply shrugged. "He was a good man." I stared at her. Most people would have framed a letter like that. Displayed it proudly. She had tucked it into a box and forgotten about it. The deeper we dug, the more stories emerged. Dozens of letters. Maybe hundreds. Different names. Different lives. But the same theme. People she'd helped. Families she'd supported. Lives she'd changed. Stories I'd never heard before. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone about this?" She smiled. "Because none of it was about me." That answer summed up my grandmother perfectly. Then we discovered another folder. At first glance, I assumed it contained ordinary financial documents. Bank records. Nothing unusual. Then I started recognizing names. My father's. Uncle Ray's. Several cousins. The numbers made me blink. $5,000. 12,000. 20,000. 35,000. Loan after loan. Year after year. Every file carried the same notation. Paid by Margaret. Never repaid. Never discussed. Never mentioned again. I looked at Grandma. They borrowed all this money? She nodded. They needed help. My jaw tightened. Did any of them ever pay you back? A small smile crossed her face. You already know the answer. I did. Suddenly, pieces of my childhood started falling into place. The summer my parents nearly lost their house. Grandma stepped in. When Uncle Ray's business collapsed, Grandma helped. Medical emergencies. Car repairs. College tuition. Every crisis seemed to end the same way. Grandma quietly wrote a check. Again. And again. And again. The realization made my blood boil. Not because she had been generous. Because they had forgotten. Or worse. Chosen to forget. Do they even realize how much you've done for them? Grandma considered the question carefully. Once upon a time, yes. She glanced toward the living room where my parents were still making plans for her future. Now? A sadness crossed her face. I think people sometimes rewrite history when gratitude becomes inconvenient. The words hit me harder than anything else we'd found in that trunk. Because deep down, I knew she was right. A few moments later, Grandma reached into the footlocker and handed me a weathered leather journal. This is more important than any amount of money, she said. I opened it carefully. The pages were filled with handwritten entries spanning decades. Thoughts about family. Lessons learned during her years in the Navy. Personal reflections. Small observations about life. Her handwriting remained remarkably consistent throughout, precise, disciplined, unmistakably hers. One entry immediately caught my attention. It had been written not long after my grandfather passed away. I read it quietly. Today I learned that grief and responsibility can share the same space. I miss him more than words can express, but the children still need me. Tomorrow I will get up and keep moving. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't about her savings. It wasn't even about the inheritance. It was about trust. She had spent her entire life giving to others. Now the very people she had sacrificed for were treating her like an inconvenience standing in the way of a payday. Eventually, I asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind all afternoon. Grandma, what exactly did you mean when you asked me to help you get revenge? She was silent for several moments. Then she folded her hands together. I don't want to hurt them. I waited. I don't want to embarrass them. Another pause. I don't even want them punished. Now I was genuinely confused. Then what do you want? She looked directly at me. The same calm eyes that had comforted frightened patients and grieving families for decades. The truth. The truth? She nodded. They've spent years convincing themselves they're good people. Her voice remained steady. I want them to see who they've become. The room fell quiet. Outside, I could hear my father laughing. Uncle Ray was talking about property taxes. Neither of them had the slightest idea what was happening in the kitchen. Grandma reached into the footlocker one last time. This time she pulled out a large sealed envelope. Unlike everything else we'd found, it looked relatively new. Very new. She placed it in my hands. What's this? A knowing smile appeared on her face. The kind that immediately sparks curiosity. Something they know absolutely nothing about. I looked down at the envelope and then back at her. For the first time all day, my anger gave way to something else. Anticipation. Whatever was inside had clearly been important enough for Grandma to keep hidden. Important enough to make her believe the truth still had a chance. I studied the envelope for several seconds. There was nothing remarkable about it. No bold labels. No warning stamps. No dramatic markings. Just a simple manila envelope with 2 handwritten words on the front. For Sarah. Nothing else. No explanation. No instructions. Yet somehow it felt more significant than anything else we'd uncovered. "Go ahead," Grandma said. I carefully broke the seal. Inside were several documents. At first glance, they appeared to be ordinary legal paperwork. Then I started reading. And suddenly everything made sense. The first document came from a law firm in Columbus. The second was prepared by an accounting firm. The third introduced something called the Margaret Mitchell Veteran Service Foundation. I looked up. "The what?" Grandma smiled. "The foundation." I blinked. "You started a foundation?" "5 years ago." For a moment, I simply stared at her. 5 years. My parents spoke with her constantly. Uncle Ray visited regularly. How could none of them know? Then again, maybe the answer was obvious. They had never really been paying attention. I returned to the paperwork. The mission of the foundation was straightforward. Provide emergency assistance to veterans. Fund scholarships for military families. Help aging veterans remain independent in their own homes. Support service members facing financial hardship. The organization wasn't just an idea. It already existed. Legally established. Fully funded. Fully operational. I flipped through the financial records. The numbers nearly made me whistle. Over the years, Grandma had quietly transferred a substantial portion of her assets into the foundation. Not enough to leave herself struggling, but enough to create something that could help people for decades. "You built all of this yourself?" She smiled softly. "I had help." "From who?" "A lot of good people." For several moments, I simply sat there staring at the documents. My parents thought they were fighting over a fortune. The reality was very different. Much of that money had already been dedicated to something far greater than inheritance. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't secret. It had simply gone unnoticed. Because nobody had bothered asking what mattered to her. They only cared about what she owned. Then another document caught my eye. This one was different. A revised estate plan. Recent. Very recent. Signed only 3 months earlier. I began reading. The house would eventually be sold. The proceeds would go directly to the foundation. Some assets would still be distributed to family members. But there was a condition. Actually, several conditions. I read the document once. Then again. Then a third time. And suddenly I laughed. A real laugh. The first genuine one I'd had all day. Grandma raised an eyebrow. "What?" I looked up from the paperwork. "This is brilliant." She gave me an innocent look. "I have no idea what you're talking about." I laughed again. "Oh, you absolutely do." The conditions weren't cruel. They weren't vindictive. They weren't designed to humiliate anyone. In fact, they were surprisingly reasonable. But they perfectly reflected who Margaret Mitchell was. Even now, after everything, she wasn't interested in revenge. She was interested in character. The inheritance wouldn't go to whoever complained the loudest. Or whoever showed up with the biggest sense of entitlement. It would go to the people willing to demonstrate kindness, service, and responsibility. The very values she'd spent a lifetime trying to teach. And somehow, that made the entire plan even more powerful. Anyone who hoped to receive money from the estate would have to earn it in a very specific way. They would need to complete community service hours. They would have to volunteer with veteran support organizations. They would be required to attend financial literacy and responsibility workshops. And most importantly, they would have to provide documentation proving they had done it. No loopholes. No special treatment. No excuses. I couldn't help smiling. "This is your revenge?" Grandma shook her head immediately. "No." "Then what is it?" A small smile crossed her face. A lesson. That sounded much more like the woman who had raised me. The woman who believed character mattered more than money. The woman who spent her life helping people become better, not because she wanted control, but because she genuinely cared. She understood something many people never learn. Money doesn't change character. It reveals it. If you're generous, wealth gives you more opportunities to be generous. If you're selfish, wealth often magnifies that too. Grandma had lived long enough to know the difference. For the next hour, we carefully reviewed the documents. The more I read, the clearer everything became. She wasn't acting out of anger. She wasn't scrambling to protect herself. She wasn't vulnerable or unprepared. She had planned. Methodically. Responsibly. Everything was legal. Everything was documented. Everything had been organized years in advance. It was classic military thinking. Prepare long before you need to. Not revenge. Stewardship. There was a huge difference. Then I noticed her expression shift. The smile faded. The sadness returned. Something else was bothering her. What is it? She hesitated before answering. They've been pressuring me. I straightened immediately. What kind of pressure? Sign this. She counted on her fingers. Sign that. Another finger. Think about your future. Another. Do what's best. Her voice stayed calm, but beneath it I heard the hurt. The loneliness. The disappointment. They keep treating me like I can't make decisions for myself anymore. That hit harder than I expected. Because countless older adults know exactly what that feels like. The moment people stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a problem to solve. A responsibility. A burden. An obstacle. Have they actually asked you for money? Grandma let out a soft laugh. Oh yes. How directly? She glanced toward the living room. Very directly. I shook my head. Part of me wanted to storm in there and confront every one of them. Another part understood exactly what Grandma was trying to do. She didn't need me to fight. She needed me to see. To witness the truth with my own eyes. As if on cue, voices drifted toward the kitchen. My father. My mother. Uncle Ray. They were coming back. Grandma quickly gathered the documents. Not because she was hiding them. Because the time wasn't right. Not yet. A few minutes later, everyone was seated around the dining room table. The atmosphere felt strange. Forced. Like actors pretending to be a family. My mother asked about my recent training assignment. Uncle Ray complained about fuel prices. Dad launched into a discussion about local politics. Meanwhile, nobody mentioned the paperwork covering the living room. Nobody mentioned assisted living. Nobody mentioned inheritance. The dishonesty was exhausting. Then my father cleared his throat. We've been talking. Immediately, every alarm bell in my head started ringing. Grandma remained composed. Oh? Dad smiled. It was the same smile I'd seen my entire life. The smile he used when he wanted something. We found a wonderful retirement community. Grandma calmly took a sip of coffee. Did you? Mom jumped in. They provide transportation, activities, medical support, everything. Uncle Ray nodded eagerly. It would be perfect for you. I watched Grandma closely. Her expression never changed. Years of military discipline kept every emotion hidden behind a calm exterior. Then Dad reached into his briefcase. And there it was. The real reason for the visit. Paperwork. He slid a folder across the table toward her. If you sign these, we can start moving forward. The room suddenly felt very quiet. I looked down. Property transfer documents. Exactly what I expected. My pulse quickened. Every instinct told me to intervene. Then I felt Grandma's hand lightly touch my arm beneath the table. A silent command. Not yet. And then she did something unexpected. She smiled. Not warmly. Not coldly. Knowingly. Like someone watching a movie whose ending she already knew. She gently pushed the folder back toward my father. Not today. His smile disappeared. Mom. Not today. This time her voice carried enough firmness to stop him mid-sentence. Everyone at the table looked surprised. Including me. For the first time all afternoon, my father looked uncomfortable. Not irritated. Not annoyed. Uncomfortable. As though he suddenly realized the conversation wasn't going according to plan. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Grandma stood by the front window watching their vehicles disappear down the street. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The house felt strangely peaceful. Finally, she turned toward me. I think it's time. Time for what? Her eyes sparkled. Not with anger. Not with resentment. With certainty. The family meeting. I frowned. The family meeting? A family meeting? I asked. Grandma's smile returned, the kind that suggested she already knew how everything would unfold. The one they'll never forget. In that moment, it finally clicked. She wasn't planning revenge. She was preparing something far more powerful. A reckoning built entirely on truth. For the next 2 weeks, I remained in Ohio. Officially, I was using accrued leave before reporting to my next assignment. Unofficially, I was helping my grandmother prepare for what she kept calling the family meeting. At first, I imagined a difficult conversation around the dining room table. An intervention. A confrontation. A chance for everyone to air their grievances. I couldn't have been more wrong. Grandma had something much larger in mind, and far more effective. The planning started the very next morning. We sat together at her kitchen table with cups of coffee, legal pads, and a growing sense of purpose. The same table where I'd found her in tears. But the woman sitting across from me now felt different. The hurt was still there. The betrayal hadn't vanished. But it no longer controlled her. She had direction. She had resolve. The woman I remembered from my childhood was coming back, not because the pain was gone, but because she had decided what to do with it. Who should be invited? I asked. Grandma thought carefully before answering. People who know the truth. It sounded simple. It wasn't. Over the next hour, she filled page after page with names. Retired veterans. Former patients. Neighbors. Church members. Volunteers. Friends. People whose lives she had touched throughout the years. The list kept growing. I was amazed. At 78, she had built connections throughout the entire county. Not influential connections. Meaningful ones. There was a difference. One name caught my eye. Harold Benson. I looked up immediately. Colonel Benson? Grandma nodded. Retired now. I stared at her. The man had commanded thousands of service members during his military career. What does he have to do with this? She smiled. I helped save his life once. At that point, nothing surprised me anymore. Every day uncovered another story. Another person. Another life she'd quietly changed. As the days passed, calls were made and invitations were extended. No explanations. No details. Only a simple message that Margaret Mitchell would appreciate their presence at a family gathering. The response was remarkable. Almost everyone agreed immediately. No hesitation. No questions. Just yes. That alone spoke volumes. People respected her. Deeply. Meanwhile, my parents and Uncle Ray continued their campaign. The phone calls increased. The visits became more frequent. Suggestions turned into pressure. Pressure turned into frustration. The longer Grandma delayed signing paperwork, the more impatient they became. Fortunately, she had already given me instructions. Observe, she kept saying. Don't argue. So I observed. One afternoon, I sat quietly in the living room while my father made another attempt. Mom, we're only trying to think about your future. Grandma nodded politely. I know. You need more support now, he continued. You shouldn't have to manage everything yourself. Again, she nodded. Then she asked a simple question. If you're so concerned about me, when was the last time you asked what I wanted? The room went silent. Painfully silent. My father opened his mouth. Then closed it. He had no answer. On another day, Uncle Ray arrived carrying brochures. Luxury retirement communities. Independent living centers. Assisted care facilities. For nearly 40 minutes, he talked about amenities. Swimming pools. Restaurants. Transportation services. Activity programs. Eventually, Grandma interrupted him. Ray, when was the last time you visited me without wanting something? The question landed like a hammer. His face reddened immediately. He couldn't answer either. The truth was becoming harder and harder to avoid. Not because anyone was exposing it. Because it was exposing itself. People eventually reveal who they are. Especially when money enters the conversation. The family meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. 3 weeks after the day I found Grandma crying in her kitchen. The location surprised everyone. Instead of hosting it at her house, she rented the community hall connected to the local Veterans Center. It wasn't fancy. But it mattered. For decades she had volunteered there. Many of the veterans considered her family. On the day of the event, I arrived early to help set up. Rows of chairs filled the hall. Coffee stations lined one wall. Several display tables featured photographs. Many of them came directly from the old Foot Locker. Military photographs. Volunteer events. Community projects. Decades of service captured in images. As I looked around, something became clear. This wasn't a trial. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even about inheritance anymore. It was about remembrance. Guests began arriving shortly after noon. Then more arrived. Then more. By 1 o'clock, the hall was nearly full. Veterans wearing service caps and jackets. Neighbors. Friends. Former co-workers. Church members. People from every chapter of Grandma's life. The turnout stunned me. I knew she was respected. I hadn't realized how deeply. Then my parents arrived. Uncle Ray followed close behind. The confusion on their faces was immediate. My mother looked around the crowded room. What is this? No one answered. Not yet. Dad spotted several local community leaders among the crowd. His expression changed instantly. Now he looked nervous. Good. Maybe for the first time, he realized this wasn't going to be another private conversation. At exactly 1:30, Grandma stepped to the front of the room. The conversation stopped instantly. Not gradually. Instantly. That was the kind of respect she commanded. I felt proud just watching her. Straight-backed. Calm. Confident. A retired Navy nurse standing before a room full of people whose lives she had touched. Thank you all for coming, she began. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every person in the room listened. Every word carried weight. She welcomed everyone and expressed her gratitude. Then she invited several guests to share a few thoughts. What happened next changed everything. The first speaker was a veteran named Frank. He talked about meeting Grandma after returning home and struggling with severe depression. She helped him find counseling. She checked on him regularly. She refused to let him give up. Honestly, he said, his voice catching slightly, I don't know if I'd still be here without Margaret. The room grew quiet. I noticed my father looking down at the floor. Then a widow stepped forward. Her husband had served in Vietnam. After his death, Grandma spent nearly a year helping her navigate veterans' benefits paperwork. She never accepted payment. Never sought recognition. Never told anyone. She simply helped because someone needed it. And story after story followed. The woman broke down as she spoke. Before she even finished, several people in the audience were wiping away tears of their own. And then another person stood. Then another. Story after story followed. A former patient. A single mother. A disabled veteran. A family that had fallen on hard times. Each one shared a memory. A kindness. A sacrifice. A moment when Margaret Mitchell stepped forward when no one else would. By the fifth story, my mother's eyes were glistening. By the seventh, Uncle Ray couldn't bring himself to look around the room. Then it was my turn. I walked to the front carrying a folder, the same folder we had assembled from the contents of the old Foot Locker. Financial records. Loan agreements. Receipts. Documents. History. Truth. I looked directly at my parents. Then at my uncle. My voice remained calm and steady. Years in the Navy had taught me how to stay composed under pressure. Many people in this room know what my grandmother has done for this community, I began. I paused. But very few know what she's done for her family. The room fell silent. Completely silent. I opened the folder and started reading. The first loan. Then the second. Then the third. Emergency bills she had covered. Mortgages she had helped save. Businesses she had quietly rescued. College tuition she had paid. One example after another. Year after year. Decade after decade. No accusations. No judgment. Only facts. Nothing but facts. And with every page I read, my parents seemed to sink deeper into their seats. For the first time in their lives, they were being confronted with the full picture. Not the version they preferred. Not the version they had rewritten in their minds. The truth. When I reached the final page, Grandma slowly stood. Every eye in the room turned toward her. She looked at my parents. Then at Uncle Ray. And finally she spoke 6 words that seemed to pull all the air from the room. I've changed my estate plans. The room froze. The old air conditioner rattled softly from the back wall. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. My father stared at her. My mother looked confused. Uncle Ray's face lost all color. For a brief moment, I thought one of them might object. Instead, they sat there just like everyone else. Waiting. Grandma stood calmly at the front of the room. She wasn't angry. She wasn't emotional. She wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. If anything, she looked at peace. That was the first thing I noticed. The woman I had found crying at her kitchen table 3 weeks earlier seemed transformed. Not because the pain had vanished. Because she had chosen to face it. And there is a unique kind of strength that comes from that choice. A quiet strength. A lasting strength. The kind no one can take from you. She looked around the room. At the veterans. At her neighbors. At her friends. And finally at her children. My home will eventually be sold. No one reacted. That part wasn't unexpected. My savings and remaining assets will be distributed according to my revised estate plan. Still nothing. Then she continued. The majority of my estate will be used to support the Margaret Mitchell Veterans Service Foundation. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. My father blinked. What foundation? The question escaped before he could stop himself. Grandma turned toward him. The one I established 5 years ago. The expression on his face was unforgettable. Pure shock. He looked at my mother. My mother looked at Uncle Ray. Neither of them had any idea what she was talking about. Because neither of them had ever bothered to ask. Grandma continued. The foundation provides scholarships, emergency assistance, and housing support for veterans and military families. Several veterans nodded. One elderly man quietly wiped away a tear. Everyone in the room understood what that meant. Margaret Mitchell's service to others wouldn't end when she was gone. It would continue for years afterward. Then came the part that changed everything. Family members may still receive a portion of the estate. Relief immediately appeared on my father's face. For about 2 seconds. Then Grandma finished the sentence. But only after meeting certain conditions. The relief disappeared instantly. An attorney stood and began distributing copies of the estate documents. People read carefully. Slowly. The requirements were exactly as I remembered. Community service. Volunteer work. Participation in veteran support programs. Financial responsibility courses. Proof of completion. Real involvement. Not symbolic gestures. Not signatures on forms. Not empty promises. Actual effort. Actual service. Actual growth. My father looked up first. You're serious? Grandma smiled softly. Very. My mother spoke next. Why would you do this? The answer came without hesitation. Because money without character can do more harm than good. No one argued. No one could. A moment later, Uncle Ray stood. For the first time all afternoon, he looked vulnerable. I don't understand. Grandma nodded. I know. His voice softened. Do you think we're bad people? The question surprised everyone. Especially me. Because it sounded sincere. Not defensive. Not angry. Just honest. Grandma took a few seconds before answering. No. The room remained still. No, Ray. I don't think you're bad people. Then why? He asked quietly. Her eyes moved from him to my father and then to my mother. Finally, she answered. Because somewhere along the way, you forgot what matters. That was it. Not greed. Not evil. Not cruelty. They had simply drifted. Year after year, they became consumed by bills, possessions, inheritances, obligations, and financial worries. They became so focused on what they might someday receive that they stopped appreciating what they already had. And standing in front of them was the woman they had taken for granted the entire time. Somewhere along the way, they had forgotten gratitude. They had forgotten perspective. Most importantly, they had forgotten people. Then Grandma said something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. The saddest part isn't that you wanted my money. She paused and looked at each of them. The saddest part is that none of you ever asked if I was happy. No one met her eyes. Not one of them. Because they knew she was right. Around the room, several people lowered their heads. A few nodded quietly. Not because they were judging my family. Because they recognized the truth. Most families experience some version of it eventually. Life gets busy. Responsibilities pile up. Intentions fade. And little by little, relationships start feeling more like transactions than connections. Often, nobody notices until the damage is already done. Then something unexpected happened. My mother began to cry. Not dramatic tears. Not performative tears. Real ones. The kind that come when someone finally sees themselves clearly. She covered her mouth with her hand and shook her head. "I'm sorry, Mom." The room remained silent. Grandma didn't rush to comfort her. She didn't immediately offer forgiveness either. Instead, she let the moment exist. She let the truth settle where it needed to settle. A few moments later, my father stood. I had never seen him look so defeated. Not after losing jobs. Not after financial setbacks. Not after some of the hardest years of his life. This was different. This wasn't failure. It was shame. And shame is heavier because it comes from inside. I thought we were helping. Even he seemed unconvinced by his own words. Grandma nodded gently. "I believe part of you thought that." Her response stunned me. She wasn't trying to destroy him. She wasn't rewriting the past. She was acknowledging something far more complicated. People are rarely entirely selfish or entirely selfless. Most of us are a mixture of both. My father lowered his eyes and slowly sat back down. For the first time all afternoon, he stopped defending himself. Stopped explaining. Stopped justifying. And simply listened. The meeting continued for nearly another hour. People shared stories. Questions were answered. The attorney explained details of the estate plan. But the atmosphere had changed completely. Inheritance was no longer the center of the conversation. Character was. Legacy was. Service was. The values Grandma had spent her entire life trying to teach. Eventually, people began to leave. Veterans shook her hand. Neighbors hugged her. Friends thanked her. One by one, the room emptied until only family remained. Just the five of us. The hall suddenly felt larger. Quieter. No one spoke for several moments. Then Uncle Ray finally broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." Grandma nodded once. Yes. Such a simple answer. Yet somehow it was perfect. Not harsh. Not dramatic. Just honest. My mother moved first. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around Grandma. Both women cried. Years of assumptions. Years of distance. Years of misunderstandings. None of it disappeared. But for the first time it was acknowledged. My father stepped forward a moment later. Then Uncle Ray. Soon all four of them stood together. A fractured family trying to find its way back. Not healed. Not fixed. But finally moving in the right direction. As I watched, Grandma glanced at me and smiled. The same smile she wore the day she whispered that she needed my help getting revenge. And suddenly, I understood. This had never been about revenge. Not really. There were no winners. No losers. No humiliation. No destruction. Only truth. Truth delivered with enough courage to change people. And maybe that is the most powerful form of revenge imaginable. Because instead of tearing her family apart, Grandma forced them to confront themselves. And that was something none of them would ever forget. The months that followed surprised me. Not because everything suddenly became perfect. It didn't. Life doesn't work that way. People don't transform overnight. Families don't heal after a single conversation. Trust isn't rebuilt simply because someone finally says the right words. The wounds had been real. The hurt had been real. And everyone knew it. But for the first time in years, something important had changed. We were finally honest with one another. A few weeks after the family meeting, I returned to active duty. My next assignment took me back to Virginia. Life settled into its familiar rhythm. Training schedules. Administrative duties. Early mornings. Long days. The steady routine of military service. But I spoke with Grandma almost every evening. Sometimes for 10 minutes. Sometimes for over an hour. Those conversations became the best part of my day. The changes started small. So small I almost missed them. One Saturday afternoon, my father called. That alone was unusual. We cared about each other, but we had never been especially close. Not the way Grandma and I were. "Guess where I am?" he asked. No idea. The Veterans Center. I nearly dropped my phone. The Veterans Center? Yep. I waited. I started volunteering. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Then I smiled. "How's it going?" He laughed. A genuine laugh. Humbling. A few weeks later, Grandma shared another update. My mother had started delivering meals to elderly residents around town. Every Tuesday. Without fail. Not because the estate plan required it. Not because anyone was watching. Not because she wanted credit. Simply because she wanted to help. And somehow, that made all the difference. At first, I assumed she was doing it to make Grandma proud. But then the weeks turned into months. And she kept showing up. Quietly. Consistently. Without seeking recognition. The same way Grandma always had. Even Uncle Ray changed. Though, in true Uncle Ray fashion, he complained every step of the way. According to Grandma, he grumbled through every volunteer shift. Complained through every community project. Muttered through every veterans fundraiser. And somehow, despite all that, he never missed a single one. That always made me laugh. Some people grow gracefully. Others grow while grumbling the entire time. Either way, growth is growth. As the seasons passed, I noticed something else. Grandma smiled more often. Not because she forgot what happened. She never forgot. But the burden she had been carrying seemed lighter. The resentment she feared might take root never truly did. And that mattered. Because bitterness has a way of hurting the person who carries it most. Grandma understood that better than anyone. The following spring, her health began to slow her down. Nothing dramatic at first. Just little things. Less energy. More doctor's appointments. Longer afternoon naps. A slower pace. She remained fiercely independent. Still stubborn. Still sharp. Still fully capable of winning any argument she decided to enter. But age was finally beginning to catch up with her. Whenever I had leave, I flew home. Sometimes only for a weekend. Sometimes longer. Those visits became precious. Because deep down, both of us understood what was happening. We simply chose not to say it aloud. One evening, nearly a year after the family meeting, we sat together on her front porch. The same porch where she had started countless mornings with a cup of coffee. The sun was setting. The neighborhood was quiet. A warm summer breeze moved through the trees. For several minutes, we simply sat there in comfortable silence. Then Grandma spoke. "Do you remember what you said the day you found me crying?" I smiled. "You mean when you asked me to help you get revenge?" She laughed softly. "That wasn't exactly my best choice of words." "No," I said, "but it definitely got my attention." It certainly did. For a while, she watched the sun disappear beyond the rooftops. Then her expression grew thoughtful. "Sarah." "Yeah?" "I need you to remember something." Whenever Grandma used that tone, I paid attention. The most important lessons usually followed. "People will disappoint you." I nodded. Life had already taught me that lesson. Sometimes they'll betray you. Another painful truth. But that's not the important part. I waited. She turned toward me. Those familiar blue eyes were still steady. Still strong. "The important part is what you do after that." I stayed quiet. I wanted to hear every word. "You can become angry." She paused. "You can become bitter." Another pause. You can spend years trying to hurt the people who hurt you. Her gaze drifted back toward the horizon. A lot of people do. The breeze stirred the leaves overhead. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. The evening felt peaceful. Almost sacred. Then she reached over and squeezed my hand. The same way she had on the day I found her crying. Only now there were no tears. No fear. No heartbreak. Only wisdom. Don't become like them. The words landed softly. Yet somehow they carried tremendous weight. Even when they deserve it? I asked. A faint smile touched her face. Especially then. I thought about my parents. About Uncle Ray. About the family meeting. About the anger I had carried for so long. And suddenly I understood. Justice matters. Truth matters. Accountability matters. But losing your compassion in pursuit of those things comes at a price. A very high price. One Grandma had refused to pay. Character, she said quietly, is revealed by what you choose when you're hurting. I knew immediately that I would remember that sentence for the rest of my life. 3 months later, Margaret Mitchell passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 79 years old. Her funeral filled the church beyond capacity. Veterans. Neighbors. Friends. Community leaders. Former patients. Military families. People from every chapter of her extraordinary life. Some traveled hundreds of miles to be there. Others stood outside because there wasn't enough room inside. I had never witnessed anything like it. During the service, story after story was shared. Stories of kindness. Stories of sacrifice. Stories of courage. Stories of service. And as I listened, something became clear. The greatest thing Grandma left behind wasn't her house. It wasn't her savings. It wasn't even the foundation she created. It was the example she set. A life built on dignity. Responsibility. Compassion. Grace. Today, the foundation continues its work. My father still volunteers. My mother still delivers meals. Uncle Ray still complains. And he still shows up. Our family isn't perfect. It never will be. But we're better than we used to be. Because one extraordinary woman refused to answer betrayal with hatred. If there is one lesson I carry from Margaret Mitchell's life, it's this. You cannot control how people treat you. You cannot control their choices. You cannot control their failures. But you can control who you become because of them. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't making someone suffer. It's refusing to sacrifice your own character while pursuing justice. If Margaret Mitchell's story meant something to you, take a moment to think about someone who shaped your life through kindness, sacrifice, or quiet strength. Call them. Thank them. Tell them what they mean to you while you still have the chance. And if this story reminded you of someone special, feel free to share it with others who may appreciate its message. Thank you for spending this time with me. And thank you for helping keep stories like my grandmother's alive.